This is something personally I'm really, really excited about. Not because I know so much about it, but because I know so little about it. Are science and faith incompatible? Welcome back, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me again. I understand that this is time out of your very busy schedules to come and speak to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which we don't particularly like.
No, I know. But then you got to think about everybody who's out there in podcast land who's listening to this, and the gold that we're going to be imparting today. Bishop TJ on my left seems to be having a bit of a problem.
I almost fell out of my chair.
Yes.
Wow.
I really almost fell out of my chair.
That would have been epic.
This floor is dangerously flat. So these kinds
Holy
of
ground.
things-
It's on holy ground.
Yes.
Good.
Why? Because the bishop's in the room. Or
Yeah. So thank you, TJ, on my left. Thanks for coming back.
No, really great to be here. Looking forward to chatting about this and that.
Yes, it's today's a difficult one.
Yeah.
We have the lovely Felony with us again,
Thank you.
who is particularly versed on the subject we're going to be speaking about today. So
Right.
we're looking forward to hear what you got to say.
Absolutely. I
An
can't wait to
authority.
share it.
I noticed that a mate,
Yeah.
Melanie,
My
is
other
not there.
half.
So we can't refer to her as
Felemini.
Felemini today.
It's just
Yeah.
We're gonna
Felony
have to call
today.
her Felony.
Are we going to have a moment of silence for her as well?
Yes,
Let's do that now.
she's not dead. We just want to stress she's not dead. She's just not with us today.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
Let's have a moment of silence. Okay, that was close enough. All right.
Yeah.
We miss you. We miss you,
A
Mel.
momentary moment.
Yeah.
We have Dr. Oldewacher with us in studio, and he's, I can see he's chomping at the bit. He just wants to get stuck into this.
I just want to sing the jingle. That's all I want to. That's all.
Yeah.
That's the only
Okay,
reason why
go
I'm
for
here.
it.
Well,
is
that's
to sing
why we
the
call you
jingle.
back.
Why you
That
call-
really
Oh,
is the
really?
reason
Okay,
we keep
okay.
calling you back. Because if you're listening to us in anything that you hear throughout this podcast today, if you have any questions or you'd like to give us your thoughts about anything, please get hold of us on facebook.com/ask1.
Ask one.
That's
Great.
beautiful.
She's really
man.
getting
Yeah.
so
Yeah, that's
much
great.
better at it. Like
This
it's
is what
maturing.
I woke
Like
up, what I got up for today.
Like
yeah.
previously, his voice did like a little break thing. When he
Yeah,
hit this
now
high.
it's
He
like
practices. He
solid.
practices
No.
at home.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Every morning I practice
Yeah.
a
That
little
shows.
bit.
No.
Yeah, thank you,
shows.
thank you.
It's-
I was hoping you were going to say that.
Kudos for working on your craft. Love it.
it is a craft. It's
It
not
is-
art.
it-
It's
No,
really
no,
a
no.
joy.
It's a great.
It's a joy. It's
And
a
then
joy.
we have Tootsie's not with us in studio, unfortunately, today. He's on location, but we
Tootsie
have
the
Tootsie's
sound.
ugly sister with us,
Aww.
Dolores.
Tootsie's
thank
ugly
you.
sister Dolores.
Yes. Thank you, Dolores.
If only people could see him right now.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's so embarrassing. It's so embarrassing.
Oh, it's
Anyway,
all just gone really
Let's
well.
bring it back, shall we?
Right.
Okay, today's topic, and this is something personally I'm really, really excited about. Not because I know so much about it, but because I know so little about it. And I can't wait for us to dissect it and really get into it. And I think we started on this in a previous episode.
Yeah.
Today's topic is, are science and faith incompatible?
Wow.
Yeah. And personally, I think if you just take a general look at the world of let's call it mainstream science, and I do believe science exists. There's a version of science which is mainstream, and that deviates from actual science very often, but it seems to be the biggest discipline. If you just took a look at it, what's it?
A cursory look
A
at it.
cursory. I wanted to say a
Thank
cursory
you,
look.
Doctor.
If you took a cursory look at mainstream
do?
science today, there is a huge disconnect between science and God. Thoughts?
Are we allowed to disagree on the show?
I think so.
We have
Yeah.
to disagree on this show.
Just maybe it would end up being
maybe a good way to start this is by going back to the beginning. Going back to when science started, the scientific revolution. Because we had a little talk about this before we started, and we asked ourselves what's the right question to ask, and I believe one of the versions that we came up with is can science and faith be reconciled?
Yeah.
Reconciled, yeah.
And we said, well, that may be the wrong question to ask for various reasons. And I think one of the reasons that is the wrong question to ask is that implies that there is this huge break between science and religion that's almost irreparable. I don't necessarily think that's the case. I don't know. We'll delve into that, I'm sure, and I'm sure at some point Leon and I, or what are we supposed to call him?
Donnie
Chang and
Chang.
I.
Who's Leon?
We'll yeah. I'm sorry, I don't know who
Yeah.
Leon is. It's Donnie Chang.
That's because I sit behind this
At
glass.
some
that
stage,
you guys can't really see me.
Donnie and I will get into a fist fight or something. That'll be fun.
Yeah,
but
well,
but,
what do
but
you-
maybe that is a good way to start. Is just to go back to the beginning and look at, in the past, have science and faith been on the same page or not? Was there a point at which science and faith you could hold to both quite comfortably? Was there a point?
Yes, we need to just distinguish here what kind of science we're talking about, because there was kind of higher learned learning as far back as the Greek Empire, where humanism was already starting to take root. They were very religious in that they had gods for everything, and the gods for a lot. But science, the science and the philosophy that they were talking about there was a way to kind of better understand their understanding of the world around them through the gods. Our modern science, the kind of science that started where people would think of people like
Well, I think
Darwin.
Yes. Well, modern science, natural science is probably a good way to describe it. Anything after the scientific revolution, anything
Yes.
after, let's say, 16, 17, 1800s.
yeah.
Maybe that's a good.
But a lot of those kind of founding fathers of what we would the natural science, if we're going to call it that, were Christian.
Yeah.
They were using this science as a way to prove the world that God had created. Like separating God from the world was never. It wasn't what they were trying to do. They were trying to understand the world that they understood God created better.
Yeah.
At some point, science, man,
Yeah.
said that, well, what we're learning now, we're so clever, we don't actually need God. God, we can explain everything without God. And that is where,
That's where the
in
problem
my
starts.
opinion, things
I
diverge.
think it's an important thing to recognize first and foremost is that science in its beginnings, there was no clash between science and faith. There were many esteemed scientists in the early days, and even up to modern times, who have there is no problem for them with being people of faith and being scientists. I mean, I called up a little list here in front of me that just some random folks that we all know. William Turner, the father of English botany, right? Christian. Johannes Kepler, the 16th century astronomer. Who else is on here? René Descartes, analytical geometry. We talked about the scientific revolution, a key figure in the scientific revolution. Robert Boyle, the first modern chemist. Isaac Newton. I mean, who doesn't know Newton? But you can go further than that. Max Planck. Many people would say the founder of quantum physics. Linnaeus, the father of taxonomy. Francis Collins, I think we mentioned last week, is the former head of the Human Genome Project. So many people, so many scientists from back in the day right up to the modern era who see no disconnect whatsoever between their faith and what they do as scientists.
I didn't realize that's an interesting list.
Yeah.
I didn't realize most of those people were Christian. Or people of faith, not necessarily Christian.
No. Christian.
Really?
Christian.
Yeah.
Some of these guys had hopes to be theologians. Some of them studied to be pastors, preachers.
So those that can become Christians, those that can't become scientists.
Oh,
Yeah, I actually read somewhere that by 2010, 40% of American top scientists were actually Christian.
That's an interesting statistic.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
there are quite a few lists like
Yeah.
that. Some of them higher, some of them lower.
Yeah.
But I think it's worth recognizing that there are scientists today, and there
Yeah.
have been scientists in the past that see absolutely no
Problem
issue
with-
with being scientists
Yeah.
and being people of faith.
Yeah. So I'm still
Why?
kind of also sorry.
No, go.
I was going to say that I'm also still confused as to when did this whole thing even become an issue for certain people, like the whole science and faith thing. Why is it even being questioned in the first place? Like, like when did this whole thing just
when did
arise
it
as a
come in?
problem? Like,
Yeah.
if you go like Heinz was saying, to go like back in the day, so when God created the world, well, yeah, God created the Bible and He created the world, and He's no longer physically here. But then He's not depending on us to kind of carry on bringing order and beauty to the world. And then how do you do that without including science in it somewhere down the line?
Yeah, I quite like that that line of questioning, because for me it sort of brings me back to what those words mean or what they're really about. When did it become a problem? The word, and you can laugh at me, but I studied Latin in high school. And for some reason, I just happened to remember that the
So that's
words,
now Latin.
the words,
French.
No, I really didn't mean to laugh at you.
What other language do you know?
Portuguese?
Portuguese.
Yeah.
Hey man, TJ is a man of many hidden talents.
So I think, if I'm not mistaken, and I hope my Latin teacher doesn't sort of come back from wherever she is and say, how dare you. But I think the word science comes from the Latin word sciere, which simply means to know. Faith is a completely different realm because it's about our beliefs. Faith has never really, as far as I understand it, and I really do stand to be corrected, but I've never seen a point at which faith has gone out of its way to say anything negative, in a sense, about science.
Quite the opposite.
Quite the opposite, because in fact, God's initial mandate to mankind, as it were, was to, go forth and to multiply. And I think part of that was go and discover this world I've created. Go and, as Felony said, go and make it beautiful. Go and discover and make it a massive adventure. Whereas there seems to be this branch or this movement within, and I'm not saying all science, but certainly, as you guys said earlier on, this sort of agenda within a part of the scientific community to talk about faith as if it's an irrelevant thing, because science is sort of this higher plane than faith, but faith has never done that. So I quite like Felony's question, because it implies to some extent an agenda of sorts. And for me personally, I don't think that should ever have been a problem. I think those two things are important in their own right and should never be at odds with each other.
Yeah. I just want to pick up on what you said. Science is to know or get to know. So to discover things that we don't know, understand how stuff works.
Yeah.
A religion does exactly that, but it deals with the metaphysical, getting to know God, discovering God.
Well,
so it's a similar discipline in that it's a journey of discovery. Science is a journey of discovery.
The easy way to think about that for me is just to say science deals with how and faith deals with why.
Yes.
Yeah.
Science asks how questions and faith. This is a good example of, let's say, for example, we talked about the Big Bang last week, and we talked about evolution and things like that. Imagine, if you will, a kitchen sink full of ants, right? And then someone comes and opens a tap or washes all the ants down the drain, right? You're going to get two types of ants. One type of ant's going to say, you know what happened? Well, when they finally end up in the drain down there, and they kind of survived, and then the kids come together, and daddy's now going to tell them what happened. You're going to get two kinds of ants. One kind of ant is going to say, you know what happened? We were all happily sitting in the zinc. Life was good. We were having a meal. And then all of a sudden, out of the sky appeared this massive just wall of water, and it just washed all of us down the drain. It was It was incredible. It was awe-inspiring. Just this massive wash of water. That's how one ant would explain it. The other ant will say, well, what happened was at 2:45 p.m., a giant big hand appeared and opened turned the tap counterclockwise, and out of a spout roughly 4 inches above the sink appeared a stream of water that washed out. Which one's right? Right?
Yeah.
Which one's right? Well, both are right. They're explaining the same thing in different ways. And I think, to me personally, that helps me to understand how science is and how faith is. They talk about the same things, but they explain them in different ways.
Yeah.
I just want to
Very good analogy.
Yeah, I like the distinction between how and why questions.
Yeah.
But let's call it naturalism then. The atheistic branch of science that exists to prove that there is nothing outside of nature.
Yeah.
What we see,
Yes.
what our five senses can.
There's a word for that: scientism. Scientism. Whenever you add an ism to something, that it takes it to the extreme.
Yeah,
Scientism
it
is
becomes
the
an
idea that
ideology.
the only valid source of knowledge, the only thing that's real, is scientific knowledge. Which
But the interesting thing there is that if we take naturalism says that there is no why.
Yeah.
There's only the how.
Yeah.
There is no why. And I was reading recently this week, the whole atheist argument of junk DNA proving that evolution is a fact, that we came from a common ancestor, and that 80% of our DNA is made up of junk DNA, which serves no purpose, and it's all just leftovers from billions of years of evolution. They've now discovered that it's not 20% viable DNA, 80% junk DNA. They're saying that 80% of our DNA that's previously been considered junk serves a purpose, which means that now atheists are going, well, hang on a second, that puts the why back into the equation. Now scientists are having to go, well, if it has purpose, it has to have if it's got a function, it has to have a purpose. And where did that purpose come from? And you cannot introduce purpose into naturalism, because there is no such thing in naturalism. So even the hardcore sciences, like the atheistic naturalistic science, that question of why is built into everything.
But you used two words there in one sentence that I think you need to also distinguish between. I think it's worth mentioning that naturalism is not science. Naturalism is taking science to an extreme that I think is not warranted. Naturalism is taking the scientific method, which I think is perfectly valid. We want to know how the world works and why, how it works, like it works. That's great. But it's taking that to the extreme of saying, well, that's the only thing that matters. And number two, that's the only thing that exists. And now you're moving well out of the realm of science.
Yeah, it becomes faith-based.
Yes.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. I really like that analogy. Well, it's not an analogy, an explanation. That works. Yeah. I like that.
For me, it's problematic. For me, it's problematic as well. Donnie, I quite like what you said about this introduction of an idea that the question why is sort of irrelevant. I think I'm paraphrasing what you said, and I hope I'm re-paraphrasing you correctly. But the idea for me that a group of people can just come to a table, a discussion table, and say the why of things is irrelevant, for me is problematic, because there's just something in human existence and human nature where if we yearn to know, it's built into us. There's something valid about that. You can't come to somebody and say their feelings or their sense of something is what gives you that right? If you guys get what I mean, there's nothing that gives a group of scientists who have a specific sort of what they call lack of belief about things to say why is irrelevant. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Who
gives
them that right? Yeah,
it's
arrogance.
It's supreme arrogance. And that is a big problem that I have with. I don't have a problem with science.
Yeah.
I believe everything scientific, physics, all of that was designed and created by God.
Yeah.
And he doesn't have a problem with us exploring that. Getting back to what you were saying, TJ, about when God said, "Go forth and multiply," I don't think he just meant have tons of kids. Multiply knowledge, multiply art, multiply everything. Like the entire human existence, multiply it.
Yeah.
So I don't believe God has a problem with us asking these questions.
Yeah, I don't think so at all. I think, if anything, God wants us to ask these questions. God wants us to. That's why He's given us mind and the ability to interrogate things and think about things and conceptualize new things. And He has made us that way. And to deny that would be to deny a part of who He's created us to be. That's why I would say if you're a Christian, you have even more reason to be a scientist than someone who does not believe that God exists.
Yes.
You have more reason to explore. You have more reason to ask the big questions. Right? Because I think when I just look at the state of science today, I think some of the more meaningful answers to questions like, why are we here? Why is there something rather than nothing? Some of the more meaningful answers to those questions come from the theological field versus what science can offer.
Yeah.
Once again, it comes down to the whole why thing.
Yeah. And it's I don't think it's coincidental that the leading philosophers currently, there's a large, I'm not sure of the percentage exactly, but it's a large percentage of current modern philosophers who are Christian. Because I don't think you can ask those questions and answer them honestly without having to just acknowledge that there is something bigger out there, that this didn't happen by accident. To say that everything just happened through a sequence of a countless number of accidents and mistakes and chance doesn't add up. It's not a coherent argument.
Yeah.
So okay, let me ask you this then, Leon. The differences between the conflict or the supposed conflict, or whatever your views on that, the conflict between science and faith at the moment, is that a real conflict or is that just a perceived conflict?
No, it's a conflict.
Is there a conflict or is it a perceived?
No,
conflict?
there is a conflict. I believe. Maybe I'm the only one who does.
No.
I honestly,
I'm waiting
I
to
do
hear
think-
what you have to say.
Yeah,
but I
yeah.
think
No,
I'll
there
agree
is an
with you.
absolute conflict because science. I think we need to just define from now on when I talk about science, I'm talking about the thought leaders in science, people like the Stephen Hawking's, Richard Dawkins, the new atheists, that whole the guys who are sort of leading the charge in science currently.
Okay, hang on, because this is important to already to stop there. Is this when you group this the guys who lead the charge and the new atheists, are you doing so for a reason? Are you saying like, for example, would you consider like John Lennox or like Francis Collins, like who is a leading scientist on one of the what was one of the biggest scientific endeavors in the history of mankind? Would you consider?
Yeah, I don't think he gets the same kind of headline grabbing.
Yes, he does. Yes, he does.
Well, I mean, the Human Genome Project was huge, but you don't hear about him the same way you hear about Richard Dawkins and his God delusion books and this.
Sure,
this
in the kind of popular.
Yeah,
place,
but you see
right?
that's where the battle is. The battleground is in the minds of the masses, and that's where these guys are having the biggest impact.
But that's why I'm asking: is it a perceived conflict?
No, it is, because
is it a real conflict?
I believe it's a real conflict because that thinking is now dictating what our kids get taught in school, and this aggressive anti-belief system is being pushed in schools. Kids are being brought up to believe that you're an accident. It's no wonder that the suicide rate amongst school kids is as high as it is.
But
or drug addiction.
if you're a real scientist that sticks to science, can you say that it was an accident? That's
Calling
making,
it anything
that's
else is
making a philosophical statement.
Yeah.
That's
but
saying
calling
more
it-
than real science.
Yeah,
says.
but that is a big problem. That's the problem that I have with science, is that it's become axiomatic. It's not about what they're doing. Is they're taking evidence and they're using it to support their theory instead of
But
they're
that's not-
taking
but
their
that's not a
theory to support their but that is the way science works. Currently, there is a big problem with science, and I know people who work in the sciences who he's actually a friend of mine who's left the scientific field. He was trying to create energy out of biological organisms and blah blah blah. He was there. He was in it, and he said to me that he just the science has become so unscientific. And he has his reasons, but my reason for believing that is that you use your theory, the goal that you're trying to prove to explain the evidence that you're finding. So you're using there's a lot of circular logic that goes on.
It sounds to me like you have a problem not so much with science, but with popularizers of science who do popularize things in a way that suits their agenda.
Yeah, but that is
it
the
sounds to
large
me
majority of science.
No, I think the large majority of science is not that. I think those guys have a big voice. Like I think someone like, for example, Richard Dawkins, good example, right? He's everyone knows him. When he writes, he sells a gazillion books, and that's cool. Whatever. I've read some of his books. I actually enjoyed some of his books. But when it comes to making philosophical statements like we're just accidents, or there's no point to this, or there's no goal, there's no reason, those are his extremes. Those are his philosophical statements about how he interprets the science, right?
And that distinction has to be made, right?
I
but
think
it's
so,
everything
because
to be
I
being
think
made.
I think my personal opinion is the battle is not so much with science, but with popularizers of science who interpret things in a way that suits their agenda. And when you look at Richard Dawkins and the kind of generalizations he makes and the kind of just statements that he makes, some of them are ridiculous, and from a scientific perspective, a scientist would look at that and go, it's just ridiculous, because it's not science. It moves from the realm of science to the realm of speculation, hyperbole. It's just not real science.
Yeah.
Because there's a big difference between looking at data, looking at astronomical data, and going, we think that a certain amount of time ago this thing happened, right? There's a big difference between that and going, we're here just because of the Big Bang and therefore there is no God. That's a giant leap. That's an unfounded leap.
No, we know
it's not
that.
founded in reality.
But the question around whether or not there's a conflict between science and faith, that it doesn't matter about the fact. It matters about the effect that even if what they're proposing is ridiculous, there's the moderate majority counts for nothing. So it's this vocal minority that's pushing an agenda, and our kids are being taught that in school, and it has an effect on society. To have kids growing up that they essentially they're an accident. Whether they live or die means absolutely nothing in the big picture of things. So they can do what they want. You're here for a short time, so do whatever. Have fun. Party hard, die young, and have a good-looking corpse. That's very much the mindset. So sure, if you want to have sex when you're 14, go for it, because there's nothing morally wrong with it. Morality is a construct, and that kind of thinking, it permeates every aspect of society, and that comes from that kind of thinking. That comes from bunny ears scientific thinking that we're being fed every single day.
But sorry. DJ,
So there seems then to have been a redefinition, and I think it's almost a corrupting of what essentially science is and means, because based upon what Donnie is saying now, if we call this sort of ignoring of what is moral and we say because of science, that's actually not, it shouldn't be true. If science in its true sense is not supposed to even go there. Like you said before, you were talking about the difference between Dawkins' science and Dawkins' philosophy. Those two things shouldn't be connected. And it comes back, I think, to Felony's earlier question. Where did these two things become a problem? And did we then tie that to what you said, Donnie, about the popularizers of certain viewpoints? And I don't believe that they represent what true science is. It is, in fact, what you said. It's a vocal minority. And that's how the world actually works. It's always been about vocal minorities coming in with this messaging until such time as everybody buys it. And yet it's absolutely untrue.
It's unfortunate.
Okay.
William Lane Craig, who is a prominent apologist for the Christian faith, right? He often says of Richard Dawkins, for example, he says, when Dawkins writes on his field of biology, he's excellent. He does a great job. That's why I've read some of Unweaving the Rainbow was an incredible book, right? But then William Lane Craig says, but when it comes to philosophy, he's merely a layman. He does, in other words, he doesn't know squat.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's where the problem starts, is when we move from the realm of science to philosophy.
Because we're taking someone, because he has this amazing knowledge and mastery in one area, we sort of mix that up and we think that now, because he's a master in this area, he has the right to speak into another area. He doesn't.
Because remember this, by the very nature of modern science, that area is an extremely narrow area.
It's narrow.
People forget this.
Yeah.
Scientists generally specialize in a very, very narrow area.
Yeah.
And beyond that area, they are not qualified to speak.
Yeah.
But we get that, we understand that. But to the average person on the street he's at the gym, friend of his comes up and says, I read this amazing book by Richard Dawkins called The God Delusion. You need to read it. And in that book, Richard Dawkins poses a lot of very good science. And without distinguishing, he starts moving into the realm of philosophy. And he starts moving outside of the realms of his. And the person, a layman reading that, he's a notorious scientist, or he's a celebrated scientist. So what he's saying here must be true, even though he's veering. There's no. It's not like Dawkins is going to say, okay, now I'm moving out of my field of, my training, and I'm going to move into a philosophical thought here. So change hats. He just kind of talks, and the person reading it takes it as gospel.
But that brings us to my point, which I'm saying is that's the reason why I say the conflict is a perceived one and not a real one, because real science done well will always bring you back to, if we're saying God created the universe, and if we're saying through science we're really trying to understand the universe, then those things should go towards each other. If you're getting what I'm saying, those two things should gel. And if they don't, that tells me that something else is at play.
Yes, I absolutely agree. Okay, this is getting very exciting for me. I would still agree. You see, there's a little bit there's a sense in which both of you are right, and I suppose this is the harmony strength in me coming through here, where I see.
Are you trying to make peace between Leon and I?
I think so.
In a sense, hear me out. You have said quite categorically, Donnie, that this is a real conflict. You are saying, Heinz, that no, it's perceived conflict. Where for me the issue is actually a little bit of both of you kind of being correct, is that it's what has actually shifted is the perception of what science is, and therefore the conflict is real, but only because the definition of what science is has been changed. And that's where the issue of an agenda comes into play.
The battlefield is the mind.
It's the mind, right?
And when the loudest voice is going to change the most minds.
For sure.
I just want to get back to what you were saying, and I agree that if science was honest, we would have to, I believe, we would always converge on the truth. But that And we see examples of this again and again and again. And a perfect example, I was watching I don't know, I don't even remember what show it was, but it was on killer whales. And now these killer whales were displaying a new type of behavior where they hunted in a certain way and they got their prey in a certain way. And the biologist, the marine biologist who they were interviewing was literally getting frothy at the mouth because we're witnessing evolution.
Hey?
We were witnessing evolution, these animals behaving in a different way. So that isn't, I mean, they're not becoming something else. They haven't stopped being killer whales. They're still killer whales. What they're exercising is adaptation. All animals exhibit adaptation. And that, you know, if science was honest, they would say, well, we're seeing an adaptation of their natural behavior. But to jump immediately to the evolutionary conclusion is just a perfect example of them taking their axiomatic belief and using that to prove what they're seeing.
Yeah.
So there is no honesty there. There's no honesty.
Yeah.
It's somehow feels like we've shifted so much to science and philosophy rather than science and faith.
Well, I think it's because people tend to group them together without knowing that they do so.
Yeah.
I mean, science
You
and
were
philosophy.
talking about The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, right? 99.9% of that book is not science, it's philosophy. As simple as that.
Personally, I think that the new atheists, guys like Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins and the ilk, they are intellectually nowhere near as great as the people that preceded them.
No.
Honestly, I think their scientific thinking is not on the same level. They've become kind of rock stars.
Yeah, I think they're Dawkins is a great scientist, but when he moves outside of his narrow speciality, then you know.
I really struggle. I really struggle when they will openly and honestly say that any evidence that comes to them, they will always look at it through the glasses of naturalism. That for them it is, and William Lane Craig, I love what he says, that as Christians, as people of faith, as people who believe in God who created everything, we're free to go where the evidence leads. But naturalists have only got naturalism, so they have to conform everything they observe to the naturalistic model. And you're not going to get an honest, your results are not going to be honest if your method is incorrect.
Yeah.
Well, let's try and give them benefit of doubt, right? Imagine if you were a scientist, and like when Heinz spoke earlier about the how and the why, and if you were a scientist and if you discovered something, does that not automatically take your mind away from the faith aspect of it? So it's very difficult to draw the line, I think, as a scientist. Imagine how hard it must be for them to be a Christian and a scientist. It's really hard. So I think what happened, if I go back to the ant story, which was great, she's so good at animation. But let's go back to the ant story, when the first ant was getting all pumped up and excited, explaining this whole thing, and then the second ant gave a more scientific explanation, does it not make the first ant look like a fool? For some Christians, I think it ends up being like that, and then that's how the topic of science and faith becomes such a big thing, is because they find it difficult to draw the line in between, in balancing both. I don't know, I think. Whereas if you think about it, scientists don't, why are Christians so judgmental towards scientists? And maybe I said that in a little bit of a harsh way, but do you ever have a scientist coming and telling a Christian, can you stop saying this, this, and that? No.
All the time. All the time. Believe me, all the time. Scientists, it's almost like the first thing they think of in the morning. And I'm generalizing here, but
maybe you are generalizing. Like when you spoke about the schools and about what our kids are taught, and fair enough, that might be true. But at the same time, scientists don't stop kids from learning the Bible, from reading the Bible, or from...
No, they want to.
They want to, but they don't have that ability to put a stop to it as much as Christians take the chances to put a stop to it.
Yeah, I would disagree with that. I mean, I hear where you're coming from, but just from personal experience, and maybe it's the company I keep, but science, for the most part, and people who have been indoctrinated with this idea of naturalism, which it's not a niche. I think personally, this idea that naturalistic science is a niche. It's not. It is the dominant belief system out there in science. People I grew up with are, for the most part, atheists because of the stuff we were taught at school. I was in school at that weird phase where you still had religious instruction, but evolution was everything that you were taught. And I can see the results of that in the friends that I went to school with. Aggressively anti-religion. They want anything religious out of the schools. They just want science to be taught because they see religion as child abuse, telling kids that if they don't behave themselves, they're going to burn in hell forever. Okay. Where if you point out to them that you tell a kid that you're an accident and you account for absolutely nothing, in my mind is far worse. Is far worse but that's a different story. So to just clarify that the naturalistic worldview isn't a marginal part of science. That is the dominant belief system in science.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying.
For a scientist to say, and I mean, like I said, friends of mine work in the sciences. To admit anything other than naturalism is professional suicide. Guys have lost their careers. Just do a quick Google search. Prominent scientists whose careers have been destroyed via questioning evolution or something like that. The list is long. They were all experts in their field until they proclaimed something other than evolution as the explanation to how everything came about, and their careers are finished.
Yeah. I don't want to go too deep down that rabbit hole because we touched on it last week. But also, it's once again, I wonder how much of this perception that there's a conflict between science and faith is caught up in the conflict between like North American style creationism and science. Like,
well, I hear you.
Because you mentioned evolution a few times, and I'm once again going to play devil's advocate and remind us that there are many Christians who have no problem with evolution.
Yeah, it's not about whether you can believe in evolution and be a Christian or not. This is about, does evolution stand up to scientific scrutiny? And there's increasing evidence, and it's not just me who spends time on the internet reading about these things. There's very prominent scientists who and the number's growing. People who cannot look at the evidence and say that this was purely by accident. It's not necessarily our Christian God who did it, but there's an intelligent design behind everything, and that is being honest to the evidence. But to admit that as a mainstream scientist literally is professional suicide.
Yes. What I'm trying to say is if there is a scientific consensus at the moment that evolution is the best explanation for what we know, questioning, accepting that has no bearing on your faith in God. That's what I'm saying many Christians say. Right?
Yeah, but I don't think that's what we're talking about here. I'm talking about evolution as a scientific discipline. Evolution as a scientific discipline has holes.
Sure, but the consensus is that would be a minority view rather than a majority view. And there'd be many Christians in that majority view as well.
Yeah. But again, that gets back to the what is the fear of actually speaking out against it. So how would we actually know? Because people who are, I was actually reading a very interesting blog a little while ago about a guy who he taught high school biology. Yeah, and through his training, he was taught evolution is the way, and his field, his personal study, his personal exploration into it led him to the conclusion that evolution just doesn't stand up. It's a flawed theory. Why people are still hanging on to it as an explanation in his mind and mine, but in his mind is unusual. But he will not speak out against it. He will teach evolution in school. He will do everything that they tell him to do and make sure that his kids pass. But personally, he will not. He doesn't believe it, but he won't say it because it'll be the end of his career. So, I mean, what do you do with that? That's not science. That's gangsterism.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think if you really find, if you were to propose a new model, you come up with a new theory that you're able to prove, you would be an absolute superstar.
Intelligent design. Intelligent design is a very provable scientific theory. It's a very provable scientific theory. In fact, most of the evidence out there points to intelligent design. But it hasn't. I honestly don't believe that. Let's say that I had this dream tonight, and I wake up tomorrow and I've got the answer. It's X, and I go to the scientific community and I say, the reason we exist, everything exists, is because of X, and it falls outside of the realm of naturalism. It will not
That's
be
a problem.
It will not be true.
No, true. That I definitely agree on.
So that's not science. At this point, at this juncture, I feel it's prudent to just put it out there. Anybody who's listening to us, and I'm sure there's lots of you who are probably rolling on the floor, frothing at the mouth at this stage, send us a message on facebook.com/ask1. And, let's get stuck into it. Let's try sort this thing out. I love this topic. I wish we could carry on talking about it all day.
Yeah,
Really?
We probably
So do I.
could.
We probably could.
So seriously, if you're listening to us, get in touch with us. The show basically runs on your questions that come
Yeah.
into us. So, and there is no question that you can't answer. The more difficult, the better. If we can't answer it, we'll send it on to somebody who can. And that address again is facebook.com/ask1.
Ask one.
Or they could send us an email
Yeah.
and ask1@oneafrica.tv.
Ask1@oneafrica.tv.
Mine seems really fascinated by that email address.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. No,
Yeah.
I'm very, very happy. about
Yeah.
that.
That's news to me too. Thanks, Val.
Yeah.
That's
Pleasure.
good to know.
I think it's worth saying one of the reasons why we have these discussions and why we air different views is because we want to remind you that's listening, that you can put a bunch of Christians around a table and you'll get many different views.
Yeah.
And even especially on a topic like science and faith, you'll get many, many different views, and that's good. And we welcome that, and we want to discuss that. We want to be open, as Leon said. Donnie Chang said. I'm so sorry, I don't know who Leon is. As Donnie Chang said, we are open to go where the evidence lead us. We're open to discussions. We're open to conversations about this topic and other topics. So
Yeah, exactly.
please do send your
Exactly.
questions.
And it's not a bad thing. And if we can at least stimulate something inside of you to start reading up on this issue, and don't just take what you get fed as
Yeah.
truth. There is the truth is out
Do your
there.
own
Yes.
research.
Yeah,
Yes.
do your research. Don't just toe the party line. And when you get questioned about these things at a dinner party, don't keep your mouth shut.
Yes.
If you're a Christian and you have a view on this thing, your view is as valid as anybody else's. Don't let somebody who takes the intellectual high ground intimidate you.
Yes.
Just
Unless,
don't-
unless
Talking
it's
about.
Donnie. Unless
Yeah.
it's Donnie,
Yes.
then his
Yeah.
view
Yeah, well,
is
I mean,
more important.
I am right.
Yeah.
And don't spoil the
That's-
dinner party. At least wait for after the party.
Well, the big problem that I have with evolution is that as science, it's bad. It's bad science.
If that's the reason, then that is a good reason to have a
Yeah,
problem
no,
with
but
that.
then to the fact that it is the accepted explanation, and I'm talking numbers, just purely numbers.
Yeah.
It's the accepted explanation as to how everything began. If you take what the Bible says as a literal interpretation of the Bible,
Yeah.
and you take a literal interpretation of evolution,
Yeah.
and you hold them up to each other, they're polar opposites. Which
Yeah,
in
but-
my mind,
But doing that with the Bible, I mean, is that the right thing to do? Like, would you take Genesis? Well, you have to do then Genesis 1. Would you take Genesis 1 and hold it up to science as like an AB? Like, is that?
I
Like,
think you
what
could.
about all the?
I think
Yeah.
you could. I think you could take the biblical account of creation, a literal biblical account
Yeah.
of creation,
But-
and you could find this. I think the science would support that. It's the same as the flood. Like the continents took X amount of billion years to shift into the position that they were, but a cataclysmic global flood would have done the same thing. Water with tectonic plates cracking, and it's. I don't think that. I don't think you need to take a figurative
I just always go back. But I always go back to Genesis 1 and go, there's more here than I can even begin to fathom. I cannot read Genesis 1 and read it like no one in the history of the world up to 300 years ago, 100 years ago, would have read Genesis 1 and said, oh, on the first day, God created this and that, and go with that as like and interpret it in our scientific, literal interpretation. The whole distinction between literal and figurative doesn't even exist 1,500 years ago.
Yeah, no, I'm
It's
not
almost
a
like
I'm
the
not
Bible
a strict.
itself is like, this is not important.
I'm not a strict young Earth creationist. I've got no problem with an old Earth, but the evolutionary process.
Sure, yeah.
I don't.
As science.
Yeah, I don't see.
That's
I don't
why-
see evidence for that.
That's why I think, just as how English and Afrikaans are compulsory in schools, science should be compulsory when you're studying theology.
Yeah,
So-
as theology
yeah.
should
Yes.
be should be
Yeah,
compulsory
Exactly.
when
They
you
should
study.
so that it should be
Exactly.
always be married
But
and never
That's
divorced.
the beauty of it. So, like, Princeton was a theology school. Oxford was a theology. All the
Yes.
big name, they were all theology schools before they were scientific institutions.
Yeah,
And we divorced the two. And there's no reason
that's
to
the
divorce
problem.
Yeah.
They got divorced.
Yeah. Yeah,
And that's-
that divorce is
is-
that's a direct result of humanism. So we can teach our own kids
Yeah. Yeah.
and hope, educate your
Yeah,
kids
just take the
at home as
responsibility
best as
on
you
ourselves.
can,
Yeah.
and just pray that when they leave the house and they go to university,
Yeah.
where they're going to be bombed with humanism, that what you've taught them is going to sort of give them a
Deep grounding into the whole.
some sort of grounding that's going to help them through all of that.
Yeah.
But the truth is, we're in such a minority. Nobody, even Christian parents, aren't teaching their kids like that.
Yeah,
I
and I
think
think that's a problem on its own.